Well, hello, and welcome to the show. One person said they liked that I started the music before I started talking, and that's all it takes, folks. Happy Monday. This is the Monday, April 12th show. It's Stand Up Pete Dominic Daily here each and every morning for you, giving you a huge, awesome, comprehensive look at yesterday's news called The Last 24, a news dump with everything else, and of course, usually 2 interviews with very smart experts. Today, I had a long one with former Navy SEAL commander Mike Hayes, who's written a new book called Never Enough, a Navy SEAL commander on living life of excellence, agility, and meaning. And since we talked for about almost an hour, I just left it right there. And I think you're really going to enjoy that coming up. I hope you had an awesome weekend. I hope you relaxed, got stuff done. Maybe you exercised. I hope you just did whatever you wanted to do. How about that? I certainly did. And by that, I mean I put muscle rub on my back after working in the lawn on Operation Lawn Redesign, which I plan to be doing for the next few more weeks. 8 to 10 hour days on the weekends, couple hours each weekday, trying to redesign everything, landscape around the new shed, and get ready for summer where we hope to entertain a lot. And so I put some muscle rub on my back, and then I took a pee in the lawn because I always pee outside. But I forgot that I had muscle rub all over my hand. And yeah, did you see it coming? I put Ben Gay all over my penis, and it was on fire. Yeah, that's what I did on Saturday night. Did you do anything that dumb? Let me know. A quick shout-out to John Carroll, who wrote the song that is playing right now, the opening song, Stand Up. And he is celebrating 31 years of sobriety. John Carroll, congratulations, buddy. Wanted to give you that shout-out. Also, John has put together a playlist for the SUPD, Stand Up Pete Dominic Gang. I'll link to that if you're a Spotify user. That's where he built that in today's show note. Oh, and while you're there, please give the show a 5-star rating and a review. You have to write a review on Apple Podcasts. You have to. I demand it. Please do. It's super helpful. Here's a nice one by somebody who identifies as Rice's Love Rice, who wrote, I regularly record Pete's expert guests and post the audio on social media to help combat the morons in this country who are damaging all of us. We have to fight the stupid. Pete has the best guests and does great interviews. Thank you for that review. Who's next? Write a review. Thank you. All right, it's time to get to the last 24. But since it's Monday, we'll go over some of the news starting from Friday through the weekend, the Sunday shows, and everything else I can get to. Saturday afternoon, I was building a railing, replacing that old iron railing that a lot of, homes built in the 60s have. I hate that thing. I don't know why I hate the thing, but I've always hated those decorative metal, iron, steel. I don't know what it's made of, but I know it's hard as hell for my 20-volt Sawzall to cut through. I get texts from listener Ty, who alerts me to this horrible video of these police officers pulling over and arresting a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. This is back in December that this traffic stop occurred, but the video came out yesterday, probably because the Army officer, Karen Nazario, is suing the Virginia police officers over claims they violated his constitutional rights during the stop. So I looked at the video in its entirety, and it was just horrible. I mean, there was just so many ways that the police officer could have de-escalated, but he just kept raising the stakes, including threatening Karen Nazario, who is a black and Hispanic male, dressed in uniform, to ride the lightning, which I guess means he's going to tase him. He was pepper sprayed by multiple times. And it's just if you haven't seen the story, I'm not going to play the audio of it, but I urge you to watch it and it's a context, and it's really heart-wrenching, very upsetting. And that was a huge story on Saturday when the video came out. And now the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, yesterday said he's directing Virginia State Police to investigate the traffic stop, which these two police officers held an Army second lieutenant at gunpoint in the southeast part of the state. By the way, I mean, if you're in uniform, and I don't care if it's a United States Army military uniform, which is what this guy was wearing, or a Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's uniform, you probably didn't steal a car, which is apparently what they're concerned about. I mean, who steals a car while wearing a uniform? I could be a better cop than that guy without any training at all. It was absolutely horrific and outraging to watch. That's one thing that happened over the weekend. But I want to take you to Real Time with Bill Maher on Friday night because my friend Heather McGhee was on with Raihan Salam. And I just have to share with you this exchange where she just cuts him off and smartens up the conversation when it comes to Georgia's new voter suppression laws.
There's a legitimate debate to be had about the particulars of the Georgia legislation, but I also think that there's this incredibly apocalyptic rhetoric, which ignores the fact that in many respects, this law is actually expanding voting access.
Oh, good grief. Here we go with the expanding voting access argument.
Again, there's a legitimate debate to be had, and Georgia is a competitive state in which Democrats...
The Georgia law?
Absolutely.
It's expanding access where they want it expanded, like in the rural areas.
Thank you.
It's actually much broader access than a number of other states, including my home state of New York.
That's not true. That's been a right-wing talking point, but Georgia is 49th in terms of ease of voting. New York is 17. Now,
boom.
It's also
the desire to
absentee ballots. It's also expanding early voting beyond many other states, certainly than New York. I mean, I think
all of those things are. This is actually deeply boring, and I'm an election law person, so I'm not going to get way into it. But this is the issue. Georgia's move is based on a lie. It is based on a response to historic turnout and black political power changing the direction of the state. New York, God bless it, where both of us live, has never had great election laws. We've got two things on the ballot this fall. And overall, you can't compare what's happening in a state that was a Jim Crow state that had poll taxes, violent repression, until 56 years ago. We've had a multiracial democracy in this country for 56 years. And when you see a party that has firmly said, our game plan is to hold on to white power, and then they begin to rewrite the rules in a way that makes it harder, not just for black people to vote. I'm very clear that this is a blunt instrument that definitely is aimed at black people, but as so many ways in which racism works and structural racism works, it's impacting young people, married women who have the wrong name of their birth certificates, all of these things. And it's a part of 360 laws that have been introduced this year to make it harder for people to vote by the Republican Party.
And let's just let her repeat that. She said it a little bit differently just before that as well. Here's more Heather McGhee on Real Time.
Let's be very clear. The Georgia election law is based on a lie, and it's a lie that compelled 1,000 people to try to rush the Capitol and do what they would have done, and led to 6 people being killed. It's still a lie that animates the Republican Party, and it's a lie that makes the majority of Republicans think that Donald Trump won the election, right? So this is actually really dangerous stuff. And yet, it is true that when we're seeing corporations have to hold the line on basic American values because they know that the Republican Party won't, right? That is the wake-up call for corporate America since Donald Trump, was that, oh, wait, there are some things we didn't have to be a part of because, like, politics, 2 parties would have protected at least that.
Right.
And this is no longer one of them, right? We have study after study now that's showing that in places where Republicans take control, the democracy suffers. And this is not just about power. It's about fundamentally a fear of sharing our democracy with the America that we're becoming.
Oh, so well put by Heather McGhee. You've got to get her book if you haven't already. It's called The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. Well, Fox News' most watched personality, Tucker Carlson, who is a pretty outspoken white supremacist, was at it again last week. I want to play the clip of him explaining replacement theory. I hesitated whether or not I should do this, but I'm going to go ahead and play it so that you have context to hear the president of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, who I know and like a lot. I should get him on the show. He was on CNN calling for Tucker Carlson's job as a result. Listen to Tucker Carlson explain the white supremacist theory called replacement.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling you, your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you, you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it would be kind of hard to argue against you because look at the evidence. So this matters on a bunch of different levels, but on the most basic level, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there. So every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that? The power that I have as an American guaranteed at birth is one man, one vote, and they're diluting it. No, they're not allowed to do that. Why are we putting up with this?
Well, that's not the first time the Grand Wizard of Fox News, Tucker Carlson, has espoused white supremacist beliefs on his show. Actually, he does it all the time. Here's a conversation over on CNN, Reliable Sources, where Brian Stelter had the president of the Anti-Defamation League, my friend Jonathan Greenblatt, on to respond to this dangerous rhetoric coming from Tucker Carlson.
But I'll tell you why, if we step back, this is so problematic. And as you pointed out, Tucker Carlson has a history of sanitizing stereotypes and of spreading this kind of poison. But what he did on Thursday night really was, indeed, as you put it, a new low. The great replacement theory, as it's known, is this toxic idea that there are a cabal of Jews plotting to overrun the country with immigrants, Muslims, black people, etc., and commit what they call white genocide. It is literally, Brian, a staple of white supremacist and extremist ideology. And so when Tucker Carlson literally introduces it to his 4.5 million viewers, he's serving as a gateway to one of the most damaging and dangerous conspiracy theories out there. And when I say that, again, let me be clear, this has real consequences. From 2017, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where this phrase was invoked, remember, Jews will not replace us, and then Heather Heyer was mowed down and murdered, to the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018, where 11 worshipers were killed, to the shooting the following year in Christchurch, where 51 people were killed, Muslim worshipers, to the murders in El Paso, where 20-some-odd Latino people were killed. Again and again and again, it is the replacement theory that's been invoked by these extremist murderers. So when Tucker Carlson invokes it on his show, when he dismisses it, right, it is so dangerous. And I think, as you pointed out, the question is really from Fox management to the Fox board to Fox shareholders. How can they countenance their network being used to mainstream the most violent and toxic ideas?
And then the stakes get raised because Brian Stelter asked the obvious question to Jonathan Greenblatt. There's nothing you can do about it. What are you saying here?
They've elevated him. He's the biggest star on the channel, the highest rated host. So what do you actually expect Fox to do?
Well, look, Father Coughlin got great ratings in the 1930s with anti-Semitic and racist rants until he was taken down. Right? And, people like Lou Dobbs on the Fox network or Glenn Beck before him got great ratings with their wild, racist, and ugly conspiracy theories. So what do we want Fox to do? I mean, first and foremost, Tucker has got to go. again, I think it is a risk, not just to the corporation, it's a risk to our society to be promoting these anti-Semitic and racist myths that literally were used by people on January the 6th to try to not just interfere with the election, but to murder lawmakers. I mean, I think we've really crossed a new threshold when a major news network, dismisses this or pretends like it isn't important. This has deadly significance. So number one, Tucker has got to go. And then I think secondly, Brian, Fox needs to look at their entire primetime lineup and finally ask themselves, does this work? Because at the end of the day, let's acknowledge Fox isn't alone in this. They have advertisers. They have affiliates, right? There are cable companies who carry their signal. If Fox won't act, it may be time for the advertisers to act. It may be time for, again, the affiliates and the cable companies to act, to finally, once and for all, say that America is, simply put, no place for hate. Why is this even a debate anymore, Brian?
Did anybody else hear Brian Stelter typing away? I mean, is his keyboard mic'd as well? Anyway, great comments from Jonathan Greenblatt calling for Tucker Carlson to be fired from Fox News for being a white supremacist, like every night. All right, one of my favorite reporters, journalists, interviewers is Mehdi Hasan, who's now at MSNBC, and he does a minute rant on his Sunday night show. I always love it, and I remember I throw it here on the Monday show for the last 24. But here he is talking about Senator Tom Cotton, who tweeted over the weekend that we have an under-incarceration problem in America, that not enough people are in jail. We need to put more people in jail. Here is Mehdi Hasan.
Tom, send in the troops. Cotton was out this past week with some new authoritarian wisdom. We have a major under-incarceration problem in America, he tweeted, and it's only getting worse. Permit me to rebut this nonsense with just 5 points in 60 seconds. Start the clock. Number one, the United States has 4% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's prisoners. In absolute terms, it's the highest prison population on planet Earth, 2.1 million prisoners prior to the pandemic. We also have the highest incarceration rate in the world, with only El Salvador a close second and no Western democracy even close. Number two, if America's pre-pandemic prison population were a state, it would be bigger than 14 U.S. states plus Washington, D.C., bigger than New Mexico, New Hampshire, Montana, Maine. Number three, the prison population has gone up 500% over the past 40 years. 500%. Number four, what about race? Black men in America are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men like Tom Cotton. In fact, as author Michelle Alexander has pointed out, more African-American adults are under correctional control today, in prison or jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. And number five, here's a stat for Tom Cotton and the party of family values. More than 2.5 million children in the United States have a parent behind bars. More than 2.5 million. That's more children than live in the entire state of New Jersey. So under incarceration, tell that to the kids, Senator Cotton. Tell that to the kids.
Ah, well done, Mehdi Hasan. All right, let me now stay with Mehdi Hasan, but also pivot to COVID. My brother is a harsh critic of Anthony Fauci, my brother Brian, who has been calling, leaving me messages and texting me that he really thinks he's a bad communicator and he's got a lot of things wrong, including about a year ago when he said he told people they didn't have to wear masks. Well, Mehdi Hasan had Dr. Fauci on his show and they hashed it out. I think this is a really good exchange. It's almost 3 minutes long, but if you're somebody who has been following this part of the story and the mask advice, there's nuance here, and I thought this was great, so I wanted to share it with you.
Let me ask you this one other question about the past, because you said we need to move forward. I agree with you. And one of the problems we have now is we have a lot of people, bad faith people, saying we don't trust Anthony Fauci, we don't trust Joe Biden, we don't trust the scientists. But there are others who, in good faith, just genuinely over the last year, and I think you've recognized this in the past about the mixed messaging and some of the different advice they've gotten on this very thorny disease. I want to play a clip of you speaking to 60 Minutes just over a year ago. Have a listen.
Now, when you see people and look at the films in China and South Korea, whatever, everybody's wearing a mask. Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks. Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
Given you acknowledged in that clip in March 2020 that Asian countries were masking up at the time, saying we shouldn't mask up as well was a mistake, wasn't it? A huge mistake at the time, not just in hindsight.
No, I keep seeing that clip getting played over and over again. So if you could give me 15 seconds, I'll go right back at you with this. Okay, at the time, three things were going on. We were told very clearly at the Coronavirus Task Force, including by the Surgeon General, who's a good person all the way, that there was a clear shortage of masks. And if we went around recommending masks, the healthcare providers who were putting themselves in harm's way every single day would not have enough. Point number one. Point number two, there was no evidence at the time that masks outside of the setting of the hospital worked. There were no data to show that. Number three, we did not know that at least 50% of the infections were being spread asymptomatically, namely by people that had no symptoms. That's the reason why, at that time, I and others made that statement. Fast forward a month or two after, it became clear there was no shortage of masks. In fact, cloth masks works. B, we started to see rather substantial data that masks outside of the setting of the hospital work to prevent infection and to prevent you from infecting somebody else. And three, we found out to our horror that 50% or more of the infections were transmitted by people who did not know they were infected. That's the reason why I changed. So, wait, let me just finish, because you showed the clip. First of all, if something is static and you change your mind about it, you're flip-flopping. If something changes, the data change, and you change with the data and rely on the data, you're not flip-flopping, okay?
I thought that was a good, tough question and a good, tough answer and a good interview. And Mehdi Hassan continues to do excellent work there at MSNBC. All right, let me stay with COVID and head over to Face the Nation on CBS, where Scott Gottlieb was on Margaret Brennan's, she's the moderator's show, and here's an exchange they had about the potential for vaccine passports in America.
I think we should allow people to own the information about whether or not they've been vaccinated. Right now, you don't own that information. The card that you got can be bought on eBay. It's not going to be verification. We've piggybacked reporting on whether or not you've been vaccinated on the child immunization scheme. There's 64 districts that the states report to on who's been vaccinated for COVID. That system is actually the system that states report to on childhood immunization. It can't be queried by individuals. You can't get access to that information. So we need to create a way for people to own this.
All right. Scott Gottlieb on Face the Nation. Here on 60 Minutes, you had Jerome Powell. He's the chairman of the Fed, and he talked about the outlook on the economy as a result of all things COVID and the pandemic.
What we're seeing now is really an economy that seems to be at an inflection point, and that's because of widespread vaccination and strong fiscal support, strong monetary policy support. We feel like we're at a place where the economy is about to start growing much more quickly and job creation coming in much more quickly. So the principal risk to our economy right now really is that the disease would spread again. It's going to be smart if people can continue to socially distance and wear masks.
And let's stay with CBS and go back to Face the Nation, where Margaret Brennan had the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, on and asked her this question.
What about kids? If Pfizer, which asked the FDA for emergency use authorization to put vaccines in the arms of 12-year-olds, if they get that, would you mandate that for kids to go back to school?
We're not having conversations around mandates. What we are trying to do, though, is to make it easier for people to access vaccines. And I think parents understand.
But why not? Schools mandate vaccines for other things with children.
Right. And the schools may well do that. At this juncture, we are not having that conversation. I can tell you this. We have continued to have good mitigation policies. We've continued to move shots in arms. And that's all despite the fact that I've got a reduced set of powers because of the antagonism from my own legislature. And so there's not a conversation on that front. But we are encouraging schools to move forward, to take a pause right now, and to promulgate policies to keep their students and their staff safe.
All right, there you go. A few clips on the COVID. And now I want to go back to CBS Face the Nation, where they had Liz Cheney on. And I thought it was interesting that she's asking for an investigation into January 6th insurrection, which By the way, this week it'll be, I think, 100 days since that occurred, I read. And I feel like I'm not hearing enough Democrats calling for an investigation. Maybe they are, and I just haven't heard them, but I thought this was an interesting clip right here.
Former Speaker John Boehner was just on CBS Sunday Morning saying January 6th should have been a wake-up call for your party. It was an example of political terrorism, was a phrase he used. And he doesn't understand why more in your party don't speak up. You did speak up, and President Trump is threatening to primary you. Was separating yourself worth the risk?
Look, January 6th was clearly an attack that was attempted to stop the counting of electoral votes. I just listened to Speaker Pelosi say that, quote, right now we're in a good place. We're not in a good place. We absolutely need, and it is her responsibility to create a commission, a bipartisan commission to study what happened, to understand what the provocation was, to understand what happened, to make sure that it never happens again. After every major crisis in this country,
there wasn't
whether
Republican
it's September
support
11th,
for the version she put forward, which would have had a Democratic majority.
The version that she put forward was not bipartisan. It was very heavily partisan towards the Democrats. It's a serious issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. You just had 140 national security officials from Republican and Democratic administrations send a letter to Congress saying we need a commission. I think that's the single most important thing we need to do to make sure that kind of attack never happens again.
Oh, wait. So Democrats have been calling for an investigation, but Liz Cheney didn't like it. Got it. And here's a little bit of the clips from CBS Sunday Morning. I watched this whole interview. I highly recommend it. John Boehner with one of my favorite political commentary reporters, journalists, whatever you want to call him, John Dickerson, great guy over at CBS. Here he is talking to John Boehner.
You write in your book that you became mayor of Crazy Town. What does that mean?
Well, by 2010, talk radio had been around for a little while. By 2010, we had the internet. We started to have apps, and people really didn't need the party as much as they used to need it. And so members could kind of create themselves out of nothing.
The new modes of communication gave those rebellious members a direct line to the party base. Playing to the crowd rather than accomplishing things in Congress became the route to success.
There's a lure there to be a noisemaker instead of a policymaker.
Making policy means finding common ground with the opposition. For noisemakers, that was a sign that Boehner was a sellout.
I thought if I could get half a loaf and live to fight for the rest, that was a good deal. No way. No way. Sellout. It's 100% all my way or nothing.
For partisan media, attacking Boehner was good for business.
It was like I was a caricature of myself, which they needed to rile up their audience, bigger audience. The bigger the revenue, the more they got paid.
I despise John Boehner. I covered him and followed him when he was the Speaker of the House, and his mendacity and his dishonesty and his lack of principle was absolutely horrible for the former President Barack Obama and his administration in terms of trying to get things done. But this is still an interesting book, and everything that he is saying is fascinating right now. Listen to this.
Without party unity, Boehner says, he had no leverage against President Obama and the Democrats.
I'm negotiating with the White House, and I'm naked. I've got no position because my guys wouldn't vote for anything. Some of these members, I'm not quite sure what they're for. They're against everything. But I've never been able to determine what they're for. When you're in the majority party, you've got a responsibility to govern, not just make noise.
Boehner is describing a system still in place today where ideologues create a culture of fear.
We had a really good member, solid member, trying to do the right thing. Sometimes it was really hard to do the right thing because they were hearing from the far right, if you will, or the crazy right, the knucklehead right, that they were sellouts. And well, they didn't want to be accused of that. And so it really put all these members in a really tough spot.
It's a poison, Boehner says, affecting both parties, but it's further along in his own.
You call some of these members political terrorists.
Oh, yeah. Jim Jordan especially. My colleague from Ohio. I just never saw a guy who spent more time tearing things apart and never building anything, never putting anything together.
And then there's Senator Ted Cruz, who Boehner says is the ultimate false prophet.
I don't beat anybody up. It's not really my style, except that jerk. Perfect symbol of getting elected, make a lot of noise, draw a lot of attention to yourself, raise a lot of money, which means you're going to go make more noise, raise more money.
And you heard Margaret Brennan refer to this clip earlier in the Liz Cheney conversation, and here is what she is talking about. John Boehner, his thoughts on the insurrection.
Speaker was at his Florida home on January 6th when the Capitol was attacked by supporters of then-President Donald Trump.
It was sad, revolting, and I couldn't watch it anymore.
Did it make you angry?
Oh, hell yes, it made me angry.
And was there anything you could do?
No. Not really, other than I decided I think I'll send an email to Boehnerland. Boehnerland is what my staff called our team.
In the letter, Boehner urges all his staffers to speak up against the forces corroding his party. Remembering that day clearly wasn't easy for Boehner.
Why don't we take a little break?
In the book, you write about political terrorists leading to actual terrorism.
Yeah.
Was this the outgrowth of the mindset that you've been describing?
Yes, no question about it. This has been the most extreme example of political terrorism.
Would you say Donald Trump is a political terrorist?
Donald Trump is a product of the political divisions that we've seen grown in our country over the last 20 years.
All right, to see the entire interview, go to CBS Sunday Morning, John Dickerson and John Boehner. Now, here is the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. He was on Meet the Press on NBC and was asked about a potential war with China over Taiwan. And I just wanted to give you a listen of what our Secretary of State sounds like.
So, Chuck, what we've seen and what is of real concern to us is increasingly aggressive actions by the government in Beijing directed at Taiwan, raising tensions in the Straits. And we have a commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act, a bipartisan commitment that's existed for many, many years to make sure that Taiwan has the ability to defend itself and to make sure that we're sustaining peace and security in the Western Pacific. We stand behind those commitments. And all I can tell you is it would be a serious mistake for anyone to try to change the existing status quo by force.
I understand that. So it does sound like you're saying that, look, we have commitments, and if China does try something in Taiwan, we will militarily respond?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. All I can tell you is we have a serious commitment to Taiwan being able to defend itself. We have a serious commitment to peace and security in the Western Pacific. And in that context, it would be a serious mistake for anyone to try to change that status quo by force.
All right, during that clip, I want you to know that I finished a bag of potato chips, mesquite barbecue. Okay, moving on. Sorry. It's now time for everything that is left. I'm 32 minutes into the episode. It's always going to be a little longer news on a Monday, I suppose. But I didn't even do a news segment last Monday because we are at the Hershey Park. But I'm back, as promised, doing it. So it's time for everything that's left. Not COVID, not politics, yet important and interesting. Time for today's news dump and another jingle from Pete Coe. And I haven't heard it, so here we go.
Stellar's Jays killed by Al, decapitated chumps. The Jays no doubt deserved it. It's today's news dump.
Wait, what is that in reference to? I forget. I don't know what just happened, but it makes me laugh nonetheless. Time for your news dump, everybody. Let's start with the Wall Street Journal's rankings of cities based on jobs. After a year in which the pandemic upended the economy, which cities ranked the strongest on jobs? Wall Street Journal crunched factors including unemployment rate, weekly wages, labor force participation, and change in the size of the workforce in the new analysis. In its view, the hottest job market in the U.S. is Salt Lake City, a.k.a. the Silicon Slopes. Generally speaking, cities away from the coast fared the best, while tourist hotspots like Orlando fell from 8 to 47. Woo! Here are the top 6 strongest job markets. Kansas City, number 6. D.C. is 5. 4 is Indianapolis. Number 3 is Denver. 2 is Austin, Texas. And the number 1 city, like I said, Salt Lake City, according to criteria put together by the Wall Street Journal. Major development in Iran over their attempt to develop nuclear weapons. Apparently, they had a blackout at their underground atomic installation on Sunday, and they're calling it an act of nuclear terrorism. No injuries or leaks were caused by the problem with the power distribution network, according to the BBC. But the head of Iran's Atomic Agents Energy Organization didn't accuse anyone of being the culprit, but Israeli media outlets said it was a cyber attack, suggesting Israel was the attacker, which would only increase tension between the two nations. So it looks like Israel launched a cyber attack on Iran's nuclear developments. On that, my friend Aaron David Miller, who was on the show a couple weeks ago, said anybody who was looking for a quick return to the Iran talks agreements should lay down and wait quietly until the feeling passes. For Biden, whatever political risks there were to re-entering the agreement, as is, just disappeared as a result of what Aaron David Miller said is stunning that the Israelis pulled this off in such close proximity to the American Secretary of Defense visiting. Unless, of course, ... Wait, what does that mean? Volcano eruptions have continued on the eastern Caribbean island of St. Vincent as more are fleeing these volcanoes, rumbling loudly for a third day. And the heavy weight of its ashfall is damaging some of the buildings. Oh, my God. Imagine that. Do you have insurance for ashfall? Wow. I mean, see, that's just the best example of there's always downsides to living in certain places. And it seems like the Caribbean is paradise. But nah, I don't think so. I'm good. All right, the average gas price is holding steady at $2.94 per gallon, but that is no reason why you shouldn't buy an electric car. Who's got one? My 2011 Chevy Volt has 164,000 miles on it, folks. It's worth it. Of course, Prince Philip died over the weekend, and I tried to explain who he was to my daughters, and I just ran out of steam. But apparently he was a staunch environmentalist. I didn't realize that, but that was certainly something good about him that I'd like to say. Also, the rapper and actor DMX died at the age of 50 years old. He was an iconic hip-hop artist and one of rap's biggest stars. Grammy-nominated performer died after suffering catastrophic cardiac arrest, according to a statement from the hospital. A Japanese man won the 2021 Masters Golf Tournament Championship. I don't know what it's called. His name is Hideki Matsuyama. Saks Fifth Avenue is going to stop selling animal fur products. The third week of the Derek Chauvin case begins, with his defense apparently looking to start this week. And finally, I saw this headline in a couple different places. 40% of Marines have declined the coronavirus vaccine. 40% of Marines? The hell is that all about? The few, the proud, the anti-vaxxers? Marines? Semper Fi, except for the needle? What the hell? All right, that is your news dump, and now it's time to get to my first and only guest on today's episode. I've always been interested in the military and veterans issues and foreign policy and war and peace. I've seen all the movies, I've read so many books, and I've done hundreds of interviews with members of the military, with foreign policy experts, politicians, and journalists covering wars and conflict zones. So I'm always interested in interviewing someone who served in any way, shape, or form, especially if they were an elite unit. And my guest today is the former commanding officer of SEAL Team 2. He led a 2,000-person Special Operation Task Force in Southeastern Afghanistan. He had a 20-year career as a Navy SEAL. He was a White House fellow. He served 2 years as Director of Defense Policy and Strategy at the National Security Council, working directly with both President George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And he's written this new book. It's called Never Enough, a Navy SEAL Commander on Living a Life of Excellence, Agility, and Meaning. His name is Mike Hayes, and I just met him via video link yesterday. We had a great chat, almost an hour long. I hope you take something away from it. I really enjoyed speaking with Mike and look forward to talking with him again about a wide social media of issues. But you can definitely follow him on Twitter. This is Mike Hayes, Hayes with an E. The conversation starts with me asking him to read from the introduction to his book, which covers a little bit of some of the insane things that he'd done in his life.
As for me, I've lived a lifetime of once-in-a-lifetime experiences. I've been held at gunpoint in Peru and threatened with execution. I've jumped out of a building rigged to explode in Iraq. I've helped amputate a teammate's leg in Afghanistan. I've made countless life-ending decisions to drop bombs on our country's enemies, and sometimes I've made those decisions in mere seconds. I've made calls to parents that no parent ever wants to receive, and I've written hundreds of emails to my wife and daughter telling them how much I love them, just in case those were the last words of mine they'd ever read. I've prayed my men would survive every day, and I've made the decisions to help make that happen.
Mike, that is the first sentence really encompasses it. You've lived a lifetime of once-in-a-lifetime experiences, and that's just really talking mostly about your military experience. You go on in the book, obviously, to talk about working in the White House. What did you do after your military service?
After 20 years in the SEALs, my last role was commanding officer of SEAL Team 2. I moved to a hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates, here in Westport, Connecticut, where I am today, and worked for 4 years at Bridgewater, and then 4 years at an IT services firm, Cognizant Technology, and now currently the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at VMware, which is a $65 billion enterprise doing business-to-business software.
But those are the what you did in the private sector. I mean, you were a White House fellow, and you worked at both the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration. What was that gig?
That was incredible. So during my time in the SEALs, I applied for a program called the White House Fellowship. Several thousand people apply, and then you go through rounds and rounds of interviews, and ultimately they select 14 people to make ideally a diverse class of backgrounds, so that you can experience Washington D.C. at the most senior levels at an atypically young age. I just turned 50 when I was 35 or whatever it was. I reported to the National Security Advisor, who reports to the president. I got to run hundreds of meetings in the White House Situation Room, and found myself just in the midst of making some of the most difficult decisions that our country makes.
I think we can imagine, because we've seen a lot of movies about what you did as a Navy SEAL. I definitely want to talk about that. It's fascinating and crazy. But like when you say you ran a meeting in the White House Situation Room, what are you talking about?
Well, let me bring it to life with maybe a story. It would be a little bit a great example. When I was applying for where I landed during the White House Fellowship, I had interviews all across the town, across the National Capital Region, for all places in the executive branch. And I was interviewing at the National Security Council with a guy named Ambassador Jim Jeffrey. He was the Deputy National Security Advisor. And among other things, he said, "Hey, Mike, I'm interviewing two real lifelong Washington, D.C. experts here for this role. You'd be responsible for all kinds of defense policy and strategy. For example, all treaties that we have with other nations would be in your portfolio. Tell me, what do you know about, for example, the START Treaty?" And I said, "Well," Ambassador Jeffrey looked him deadpan in the eye and completely serious. And I said, "I know how to spell it." That said, Pete, it's I like to think about process a lot, and you don't have to have the specific expertise. Day 7 or 10, I kind of ran my first meeting in the White House Situation Room to answer your question, and you're at the head of the table. It's the table that you see in the movies, and those are. You've got around the table representatives from the Department of State, the intelligence community, Department of Defense, all parts of the executive branch. And your job is to run a process that gets you to the best answer. You either agree or you disagree. If you agree, that group just made national policy. If you disagree, it gets kicked up a level to a more senior meeting, and goes on and on.
What's an example? I mean, is it all like top secret or something? Can you not talk about like this? What are these types of situations that you're dealing with in the Situation Room?
Well, it can be anything from slow-moving policy to crises, and I've been involved in both. And so the slow-moving policy could be, for example, things that we're dealing with right now live in the news, which is how are we going to be oriented toward Iran, or what's our general approach to country X, Y, or Z. And or it could be, hey, like in the beginning of the Obama administration, I handled his first foreign policy showdown where there was a guy who got hijacked on a ship called the Maersk Alabama, turned into a movie called Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks. And that was a really live situation. And I was the one that woke up with I'll date myself here, BlackBerry, buzzing at 3 in the morning and jumping into work and kind of springing into action and getting all the things into gear, and then ultimately making the decisions that create the policy frameworks and understanding the policy difference where the decision making lies on what happens in the Department of Defense and what happens at the White House is always a little bit of an art form between civ-mil relations, but in all cases you're providing the overarching framework for what the outcomes the country wants.
I don't know what you just said, but I do know that I saw that movie, and it sounds like you were integral in decision making to order those Navy SEALs to lie down on the ship and snipers and shot the hijackers.
That's what happened.
Pirates,
And
whatever they were called.
Upstairs, actually, I've got a really cool note, handwritten stationery, White House stationery. It says, "Mike, you made a family very happy at Easter. Thanks for the great work on the Somalia situation, Barack."
Oh, wow. Did you have a lot of interaction with him or before him? Because you worked at the Bush administration as well. The president, the principal, what do they call him?
Yeah, the POTUS. But look, I don't want to overstate it. It wasn't like I was in the Oval Office every day, but I absolutely interacted with both Bush and Obama for sure.
Wow, man, you've done it all. You really have, and now you've written this book. Who do you hope to? Well, first of all, you're giving all the proceeds of the book to Gold Star families to help them pay off their mortgages or buy houses. Gold Star families are family members who lost someone, and specifically those who lost special operations guys who died, right? I guess it troubled me because I thought they were taken care of. Like, I thought those families were kind of taken care of, and I'm sure that they are in many ways, but, it seems like they should have a house. I mean, are there issues with families who have I thought we took care of them financially for the rest of their lives in different ways.
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing this up, Pete. It really is one of the main missions that I wrote. The book Never Enough was to give back on so many levels. First with the content and bringing the message of meaning and impact out to the world. But then also literally I'm donating all of my profits, like you said. And for me, I, like all SEALs of my era, have buried way too many friends, and something like 40 brothers, if you will. And the nation has gotten better at taking care of those families, but it still is not enough. And so there are gaps. And what I've done is created a 501c3 that very quietly, no website, no fanfare, no pictures after the fact, has just paid off mortgages or bought houses for families that need it. As an example, most recently, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I was able to let a widow know that she has a home, and she had lost her husband, an old teammate of mine, in the middle of the war in Afghanistan. She got back on her feet with her 4 kids, and then had a business that was performing, and then they lost the business during the pandemic, and so she and her 4 kids did not own a home, and so as of about a month ago, they've got their own home now, and that's what the book. Man,
that's got to be the greatest feeling in the world, to give anybody a home, but more importantly, like a guy that you knew. Like, I imagine you guys would say things like, if I get killed, take care of my family, tell my whatever, and you literally did. You literally bought their families houses. That's pretty huge. What does that feel like to be able to do that? What is that sense of satisfaction like, that you were able to change a life like that? And more importantly, maybe keep some type of a promise you might have made to one of the guys you served with.
Yeah, Pete, thanks, man. It's some of the best days of my life. The 5 times I've done it so far, to be able to fly down to Virginia Beach, and to sit down with my friend's widow, one of my friend's widows, and be able to make that much of meaning and impact in their life. It is simply indescribable. It's something that the public can hear and kind of appreciate, but at the same time, unless you've really been through it, I wish I had words. It's just the most powerful thing. I cry rivers of tears before, during, and after being able to help like this.
I thought Navy SEALs did not have tear ducts.
Well, maybe I got everybody else's then.
What about the issue of suicide? Because how do you see, I was listening to an interview done, maybe you wrote about this and I haven't gotten to it, those who take their own lives versus those who are lost in battle or, in a training accident or something. Do you look at those differently? And can you help us understand why guys that you serve with are struggling to the point that they would actually take their own lives, knowing that it's probably different for each one?
Yeah, but that's another great topic, and there's definitely similarities as well. Look, to answer your question directly, I look at every suicide as direct action with the enemy. It is very simply a sickness that is in the brain that merits, merits just as much seriousness and sincerity and attention as somebody who takes a round from the Taliban or some extremist. To make it real, my first in Hell Week, my SEAL training class started with 120 guys, And by Hell Week, the 5th week of training where you're up for a week straight from Sunday morning until Friday afternoon, my best friend, Job Price, had moved into my boat crew, they call it. And the two of us went through training together. We were first roommates in the SEALs for 3 years. And then that was 93, 4, 5, and 6. And then in 2012, he was the commanding officer of the team behind me. He brought his team over to Afghanistan, and he had lost 5 guys in his first month there. And he literally shot himself in the head in the bed that I had slept in for the previous 10 months. And it's a tough issue. And it's just like we're looking at like CTE with football players and saying, was it really the person, or was it the disease that caused the person to go do these crazy bad things? It's not. There's a little bit of similarity.
So the reason I ask another question about it is because I think it's important to understand it so that we can try to prevent it, and certainly we can't prevent it all. It would seem, but I mean, do you know why Price, did that, and do you know why other guys do? Because one of the things I know, I've gotten really involved with veterans community years and years ago, and this issue, and one of the things that's pretty obvious is that when you serve in combat or any type of really adverse situation, and then you leave and you come home, there's a loneliness of people don't understand what you've been through, and there's no one to talk to, and then there's this conditioning for men in the military, much less men in general, that we shouldn't be talking. Is there any way to identify what the problem is that brings them to the point to try to interrupt it and prevent it? Because the numbers are still frighteningly high every day, apparently.
The numbers are frighteningly high. And so to answer, again, to attempt to answer directly, I think there are enough unique backgrounds and cases that it's hard to generalize but it's ultimately, we've got all of us, where does stress come from? We all have some sort of picture of how we want the world to be. And then we've got a picture of how the world is. And then the difference between how we want the world to be and what the world is where stress comes from. And so, as sometimes our brains don't necessarily work quite right, we alter the state of either the what should be or the what is. And then the chasm, the diff seems insurmountable. And so for some, somewhere in that gap is where the source of suicide comes from. But I think, the thing I did write about is one of my shortcomings in learnings through life has really yielded the unquestionable need to be intrusive in people's lives. So what I mean by that, we use intrusive a lot of times as a bad word.
Yeah.
The number of times I've asked people, have you ever considered harm to self? Has grown a lot in the last 5, even maybe 8 years, 10 years. And we need to be intrusive because, we without really knowing what's going on with people, we're not going to get to that cause and potentially stem something off. Now, look, it's uncomfortable. If I ask you, have you ever considered harm to self? Out of 100 times that I ask that, 99 times I'll be wrong, and it'll be moderately uncomfortable. But I'll take the 99 times being wrong for the one person who says, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. And Pete, I'll tell you, I unequivocally have had 5, 10, 15 cases in the last 5 or 8 years where people are like, thank you for asking. Nobody else has asked. And then been able to step in and get people some help.
That's awesome and really good to hear. Tell me about your grandfather. He was a really important guy in your life. You write about him in the book, and I wanted you to share a little bit about him.
Yeah, well, my grandfather was a special man. He was a career naval officer as well. Naval Academy, class of 1940, was at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 41 on that day of infamy, and he was bombed. Actually, backing up a step, he was, good Irish Catholic family that the Hayeses, that used to be the O'Hayeses were. It was a Sunday morning, and he was out, having a great time on Saturday night with 7 of his friends. And I'll never forget him telling me that he tried to rouse his other 6 friends and jump in a Jeep and get back to their battle stations, and nobody else would go. It was just him. And he said the scariest thing at Pearl Harbor was actually driving by the gate guard, the Marine gate guard at Pearl Harbor at like 40 miles an hour. He was afraid he was going to get shot at. But my grandfather got back on his ship for the 3rd wave of the attack, was around all kinds of, death and destruction. And made a decision that he was going to, and I can still see him pointing up at the sky. He said, Michael, I decided then that's when I was going up there. And he became a pilot, and then they spent the rest of the war as a pilot And then at age 35 for him, he was his boss got shot down, and he took over in charge of a 35 plane bomber squadron that flew out of the Aleutian Islands. And those are some of the things he's done, Pete. But the more important thing is the characteristics. My grandfather was a man who was really oriented others for self and really taught people both by example, explicitly and implicitly, how to live a life of making a difference.
You had a decision to make at some point. Well, I didn't actually I think I want to ask you why you joined the military yourself.
I think it was the underlying component of service and sacrifice and contribution.
I think it matters. Sorry to interrupt you, but your age I think it matters when you join, because every time I talk to veterans, I think there's a huge difference between joining pre 9/11 and post 9/11. Maybe you disagree.
I agree with you. Oh. I was the guy that 93 undergrad. I was at ROTC scholarship. I am the oldest of four, and I just wanted to kind of keep my parents able to pay for school for the next three, and I applied for the scholarship. My grandfather and my father, also career Navy, never pushed me into the Navy. They just, kind of said, hey, here's a path that's available to you. And maybe they were, 3 steps ahead of me and tricked me into that path by not pushing it. Like most parents, I think, I'm sure with your 2 girls, Pete, you also, leading the witness sometimes is a fun game as a parent, and leading them to the right thing is often indirect. But my parents, my dad and grandfather, of course, led me into that path, I think, and so glad that they did. And so, I'm a pre 9/11 entry. I never thought about, let me go to combat. Let me be a guy that, does all these things for the country. I knew going into the SEALs what I was getting into, but man alive, in 1993, I had no idea. And I'll tell you, the SEALs that we started making after 9/11, I would say they're all, orders of 10 or 100, orders of magnitude better than I ever was.
Do you think it's because they probably had a lot more actual missions that they were running, right? I mean, it wasn't a difference in the training or the character necessarily. I mean, you're being unnecessarily humble. I mean, they were at war and probably having more experiences than you were, even though you had a lot before then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The difference to me really is that for me, war was theoretical. For them, it was real.
Right.
And so for me, I entered out of college more of like, this is the hardest path I can possibly choose in front of me. Let me choose this. They had seen the towers come down, and they had seen, what the nation was going through, class of 02, 03, 04. It was very much like, let me get into the thick of things and contribute.
But post 9/11, you were still on active duty. I mean, you served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but just as a higher up commander. I mean, what transpires for you in terms of your career post 9/11?
Well, I was at an interesting point because, I went out. So at that point, 9/11, I had, 8 years under my belt. And at that point, as a senior leader in the SEALs, all you're doing is making risk decisions. You're saying, is the operation that we're the thing that we're going to do at night worth doing, and how do we do it where we assume the least amount of risk so that we can, basically in the SEALs never fight fair. We're working at night with lasers and night vision and all kinds of things to take on less risk than the enemy. And so what I would say is I went out on lots of operations in my 30s, and even as the commanding officer of a SEAL team at age 41, I didn't have to go out with the guys, but every fourth or so night I'd get my kit on and go out, because great leaders assume the same risk as their team, and it also helps you become a better leader because you really understand the tactile pieces of an operation better, and you make better decisions about anything from what gear you're buying to like all the way of like how you're going to do a mission.
You write a lot about values and integrity and morality and so on. And I put your name in Google and I searched through the news to find out if there was any news reports on anything that you had ever been involved with, decision making and so on. And of course, there was a New York Times investigation, and you write about that actually in your book as well. And I read the Times story first, and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, Mike Hayes, he comes out looking pretty good in this article, but I'd love to know more about that. You actually do write about that in this article article is an incident that happened in Afghanistan in 2015. But since then, of course, there have been some very high-profile issues with special forces. I think Eddie Gallagher is the one that got the most attention, a Navy SEAL who was pardoned of war crimes by Trump, who his own guys, described as a pretty bad guy in a lot of ways. And my question is, most of the missions that anybody goes on, much less special forces, get no attention. And hopefully most of them are successful in one way or another. But of course, really horrible things do get attention, as they did in this incident that you were in one way responsible for overseeing. And of course, in this case, in Eddie Gallagher. And I wonder what you think about when guys do commit actual crimes. Like this automatic respect that we give people in authority, I think is pure bullshit. Just because you're a Navy SEAL or a police officer or a politician, a teacher, whatever it is, respect is earned and you have to act a certain way. And if you torture somebody, if you beat somebody who's in handcuffs or something like that, you're destroying the entire reputation of the organization. And I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that. And I'm wondering what you think about all of it. And if you want to talk about what happened in 2015, I'd love to hear that story. You write about it in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some people that have, thought about the newspaper test, and I've lived it. So in 2012, there was a series of events that I did not believe were good. It was laid out in this. There was some alleged detainee abuse, and I did some quick investigation. And right away, you have to audit. You can't audit yourself. You need to call in an outside organization because if you audit yourself, sunlight is the best disinfectant for an organization. So it starts with what's the goals of your as a leader. Every organization, the SEALs included, has bad apples. The thing isn't whether or not you have bad apples. The thing that defines your organization is how you handle them. And so if you try to sweep bad apples, out of the way and pretend they don't exist, then you're not doing your organization any favors. What you need to do is tackle it head on and get to what's true. There's also a tendency to jump to conclusion of too quickly of what's true or what's not true. And so get the facts and figure it out. But I had my suspicions. And I ultimately brought in an investigation to investigate my own unit. That's not an easy decision to make as a commander. You don't want to have these situations going on. It would have been much easier to just kind of slap guys on the wrist and say, hey, that shouldn't have happened, and moved on. Years later, when the front page of the New York Times hit, I thought, this isn't going to be good for the SEALs. But I knew that my actions, without even reading the article, I knew that I'd done the right thing. And so, thank goodness. I will say, I think I passed the front page of the New York Times test there. So that always felt that even to this day feels good, because it is ultimately about character and values and integrity. Yeah, I mean, you literally made the recommendation that these guys should be kicked out of the SEALs for what they had done. And then they weren't. You were overruled. And then they came back under your command, or you came back into contact with them and had to deal with them again. And I think you write about that. That must be brutal. I mean, we think about the people that we hate at work and then trying to work shit out with them. But these guys were responsible for killing guys who might have been bad guys, but they were, they went way, way out of line, it sounds like. And you recommended they be thrown out, and then they weren't, and they come back to work. That's a pretty serious situation. They probably didn't like you much, or did they understand? How did you heal that divide, or did you? Well, two things. First of all, let me, Pete, just to be clear, it was never proven that they actually killed anybody. So that was not necessarily an established fact. But moving past that, in all cases, there was abuse that should not have happened. So the premise of where you're going down is still absolutely correct. Things happen that shouldn't have happened. So once we start there, I recommended that these four characters be kicked out of the SEALs. I'm very much not a believer in make one mistake and it damns you for the rest of your life. We all forgiveness and improvement, and we're all imperfect in so many different ways, and that's where growth comes from. But there are certain lines that if you cross, then you just can't walk back from that. And so I put a lot of thought into whether to recommend these guys get kicked out or not. And ultimately, you're right. The leadership decided that they would stay in. Now, we were back in the States after that long deployment. I was on my way out of the job as the commander of SEAL Team 2. But I do remember very vividly sitting on the couch with those. We had a nice, large couch in my office, and sat down across from these four guys. And I said, look, let me tell you straight to your face. I think you all know this by now, but I said you should be kicked out. The decision was that you stay. Communicate directly and honestly with people. And I said, look, at this point, it's all about what you learn and how you come back from this and how you treat people and uphold the law and the policies going forward. So anyways, that was, then I rotated out just a couple weeks after that.
How do you think that the special forces, the American public perceives special forces as a result of these long wars? And how do you think we should look at this? I mean, I've always been so against these wars, but I think things are so complicated. I mean, especially Iraq. Iraq, to me, objectively, it was the worst foreign policy mistake of our lifetimes. I don't know if you would agree to that. I can't possibly imagine how it could be seen any other way. But yet, you served in that war. I mean, these things are complicated. You don't get to make those decisions, and the same can be true. And you do apply these things to the private sector as well. It wouldn't have been the choice that I made, but, I've got to carry out this mission in this case. How do you look at how special forces are perceived, how the American military is perceived after a generation of what can only be described as horrible mistakes in my mind? Maybe you disagree.
Well, look, here's what I'll say about that is information is always asymmetric, and it's really easy to sit here today and look back at the smoking gun intelligence that Colin Powell testified about, and at the time, and I think he's on record saying that he one of the things that he wished he could walk back.
Yeah, but hold on a second. We're not looking back. I mean, the vast majority of Americans and the vast majority of Congress voted against the war in Iraq. I didn't know shit back then. And I thought it was an insane idea given all of the evidence. And Lincoln Chafee, who's a Republican senator at the time, or actually an independent, got a briefing from the CIA and said there's no evidence for it. So we're not looking back. I'm looking at the time that we went in that war. Most of us were saying, this is crazy. They didn't attack us.
I'm glad to debate whether we should or shouldn't have been in Iraq. But I think the premise of what you're saying is when you're in a situation, whether you agree or disagree, how do you handle it? Right.
Yeah.
So, look, I think you have to live in two worlds at once. And that's where also I write about a situation in Afghanistan where, I was told to do something that I believed was wrong. And I put my career on the line and said, no, General, we're not going to do that. The general ordered a bunch of Afghan soldiers to go in and do this thing that I said wasn't smart to do. And 4 or 5 Afghans were killed that night, and one of the most meaningful things that I've ever been through is flying the next day to go see these Army special forces team and sitting down with them and having them say, hey, sir, there aren't very many commanders that would have said no to the general. Like, there are literally 5 or 6 of us here living because of your decision and your backbone. And they didn't know it at the time, but man, my throat was choked up. And, I was like, man, the gravity of the decisions that you make are really, really serious.
I read about that. You write about that in the book. And I was like, how do you get to turn down an order? And luckily you did do the right thing there. It would certainly seem maybe your guys would have been better trained and would have been able to avoid some of the trouble that the Afghan guys went into. But regardless, who could possibly know? Talk about, hindsight. But how were you able, weren't there consequences for you saying no to an order like that?
Well, there could have been. There certainly could have been. I mean, I could have been fired on the spot and sent back home, just like I sent those 4 guys we talked about before right back home. But ultimately, I'm paid to make judgment and risk decisions. That's my job. And so, fortunately, I had just come from 2 years at the White House, and I was known as a pretty, sound quantity of a good decision maker and a good, commander of forces. And my unit had been doing quite well. And so that, you build your political capital through your actions and the way you carry yourself. And so, it wasn't like I was poking the general staff back in the eye saying no freaking way and arguing. It is very matter of fact of it's not and using logic to explain the why. And ultimately, it could have broken where the general said, all right, thanks, start packing your bags. But that was that was a decision where I was prepared to suffer the consequences if I had to. But I was also making a calculated risk that I was pretty sure they wouldn't actually make that decision, because I think that would have been a really dumb decision on their part.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, you had the credibility, it sounds like, to make a choice like that. It's harder to do when you're a more minor person in an organization, to go out on a limb and speak up or say something or rock the boat. What is your advice? You write about that in the book. I mean, it's harder when you don't have the credibility or the experience to take a risk. What's your advice to people who think that they need to speak up, they need to speak out?
Well, I would say that first and foremost, we are who we are to ourselves. A lot of times we walk around on the planet trying to prove ourselves to others. It starts with proving who we are to ourselves, and it starts with that vision of who and what do we want to be? What do we want to stand up for? And what are the things that are intolerable? And so if we have that kind of mental map and that line for ourselves, then when we see something that isn't up to our standards, by all means, speak up, and it might incur a little bit of short-term pain for us, but that's ultimately what the fabric of democracy in our institution and our nation is all about. Look, a lot of people have a lot of different views about different things. The beauty is that how do we all take those disparate views and bring them together, and then march together as a nation, as a melting pot of ideas. And so my encouragement would be to speak up and to be bold and to be brave, because you'll grow from it. And I certainly, if I was 21 or 28, I wouldn't have been able to make the decision that we just talked about and push back on the general. But, at age 41 and been around the block a few more times, I know it doesn't sound like that much older, but, the experiences that I had put me, like, especially coming at the confidence out of about running the Afghanistan policy in the White House Situation Room, I felt pretty darn comfortable, pushing back on the decision that day.
Mike, you've already, I think made it clear in our conversation, you certainly do in the book, that you're not afraid to embody or, share any emotion as a man. When you think of Navy SEALs, you think of the toughest guys in the world who can, depending on how you describe pain or rather strength, take a lot of pain, give a lot of pain. And we all understand that, but I also realize that you learn a lot about emotions and psychology. But my question is, I feel, this is just me diagnosing it, and I know nothing, about anything, but a lot has been written about this. One of the big problems in our country, especially, is men and masculinity and ego, which you write a lot about as well. And you mostly write about your mentors being men, because those are who you serve with. But you're also thoughtful to write. You've worked with a lot of strong women who have influenced you as well. But my question is, do you think that this kind of, some people call it toxic masculinity, I don't care what you call it, but do you think it's a problem given the fact that you have straddled all of these worlds and you have been really honest and open about your own emotions?
Well, here, I think, Pete, it's also something I've gotten better at over the last years. And I've been retired 20 years in and now 8 years out. And looking in the rearview mirror, it's I've gotten better at what you're describing right now. Look, it took me a while to even decide to write a book. I've always had the material in my head, but do I really want to put myself out there? And then if your mission is to kind of move people and inspire people and help them to do the right thing and find mission and meaning and impact in their own lives, you can't do that by writing a book that says how great you are. I grew up in an era of really either perfection or perceived perfection, and you don't show weakness. And I actually, about 3 years after retirement, was asked to go back to SEAL training to speak at a graduation. And I'll never forget one of the lines that I thought very seriously about was, asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, the name of the game, Pete. And I think that the special operations community has gotten a lot better at that. The military has gotten a lot better at that. We recognize that we all are imperfect. There's there's Epictetus is a Stoic philosopher who's got this book Enchiridion. It costs $1.80 on Amazon or whatever. It's very short. It's a great quick read. But there's a line in there where he says, when somebody criticizes you for something, then really the only answer is, clearly you don't know me that well. For if you knew me better, you'd be criticizing me for my far greater faults. And so it's just great that humility and confidence have to coexist.
Yeah, vulnerability though is the word that you didn't mention, but certainly you were talking about. Being vulnerable is also being strong. I want to throw something out there because I say this all the time, and you're the guy I'm talking about. It is courageous to go into combat, but it's probably equally or even more courageous to revisit the demons that you might have dealt with after it's over. Because when you're in the moment, you don't have time to think about it. You're making these split-second decisions, and there's adrenaline. When you're asleep, when you're having the nightmare, when you're alone and something triggers you, that's really hard to deal with. And maybe you don't know how to deal with it. And it seems like the courage and the bravery should come in confronting that demon to slay it once and for all, to get closure on it. How am I doing? Does that make any sense in terms of defining strength and courage?
Dude, absolutely. It absolutely resonates. And
that's not just for combat. Like if you've been abused, if you've been emotionally, physically, or sexually abused as a child, or dealt with any trauma, like dealing with that with a therapist or however you do. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to broaden it past, just people who served in combat.
You're hitting on exactly what I tried to do in the book, which is, look, a lot of people aren't going to be Navy SEALs or work in the White House or whatever. Yeah. Try to make it relatable and abstract it out to the real world. And I think that's what you're wisely doing right now. And so absolutely, the most important thing is being able to recognize that you need help, you need to talk. It takes friends and teammates. None of us can see directly behind us. It takes friends and teammates and others to kind of see behind us and what's in those demons or those early morning. I wake up once in a while too early. Why? Sometimes I know and sometimes I don't know. But I've seen the worst of trauma. Many times over. I've been shot at and rocketed. I've amputated a teammate's leg. I've buried many friends. And I'll tell you one story that makes it a bit real here too is that the wives and the children often sacrifice more than the service members. When I was overseas, living night after night, we got rocketed literally more than one time a day for my first 30 something days in Afghanistan. And so, look, a lot of times it was just some Taliban force trying to take pop shots and lob something in on us. But sometimes those landed way too close. I was on Skype with my wife and daughter one night and there was an explosion. I don't know. It was sounded like maybe 15, 20 feet away on the other side of a 2-inch concrete wall that was, my room. And I was like, whoa, that one was close. And my wife and daughter were like, what? And I was like, oh yeah, sorry, no big deal. We're just getting rocketed again. I do have to jump off and just make sure everybody's okay. Stone cold, calm, collected, just like we were getting shot at, just like I always am. And I was like, years later, I'm like, how much it was the worst thing I could have possibly done was just tell my wife and daughter that we were getting rocketed again. And it happened all the time.
It reminds me of a similar experience I had when I was doing a gig and I was waiting for room service and I was Skyping with my wife and daughter and they knocked on the door and I wasn't wearing any pants and I didn't know what to do. They were shocked that I wasn't wearing, and it was similar to your experience. When you talk about the families have it harder, I think I can illustrate it, forgive me for saying this, even better than you, more dumber than you, more fundamental in that. What my understanding is, when you're being rocketed, when you're in Afghanistan, when you're in a war zone, your well-being, moment to moment, second to second. And while we're now in more communications with their families, military members can be than they were in previous generations, they don't know how you are. And I understand why guys and men and women would always be dishonest with their parents, with their family about everything's fine. I don't even go out. I would want to calm their feelings as well. But that's why, I don't understand how a woman or a man whose spouse is in a war zone can do anything, function on a day-to-day basis, knowing that they could get a call any hour that they've lost the most important person in their life. That's how I understand it. How do the families function? How do these kids growing up without, a parent for, while they're on deployment, how do they deal? It's really, really hard. And I think hard, as you said, harder on the families, if you can believe it or not. I'm just trying to underscore it and simplify it even more. But
yeah, you simplified it very nicely. It is very simply compartmentalization and having an ecosystem of others, families around, so that they can have a support system and a network. Another story to bring it to life. I told you about my friend Job, who was back in the States while I was overseas. As soon as I went overseas, he and his wife and daughter went in and checked in on my wife and daughter. Hey, you need anything? How you doing, et cetera. And of course, my wife and daughter have compartmentalized, like we just described. And then after I came home, the men in dark suits knocked on his door and had to give his wife and daughter really bad news. And it was my wife and daughter and myself were there with that family when they were dealing with, like, in the first hours of finding out what had happened. And look, man, like, I'll never get some of those screams out of my head. Like, I can hear it right now. What happened that night was very, very, very difficult and a lot less, infinitely less traumatic for me than for the wife and the daughter. And they'll carry those heavy weights with them for the rest of their life.
How do you look at I tried to find you being really opinionated on politics, but you're not. You seem to be really careful about that. And I wonder why, and I wonder how you feel about the state of American democracy right now, because I think it's easy to not be political, and you can even have sympathy, but I think there's a huge percentage of Americans that are completely not dealing with reason. They're just not dealing with critical thinking. You talk a lot about data and decision making and so on the idea that the election was stolen. There's just no evidence of it, none anywhere. And yet a huge percentage of Americans believe it, of course, because the president told them, and so did many others. But there's so many things that people believe that didn't happen and aren't problems. And they don't believe in things that are problems, like climate change and COVID, or the solutions and vaccines. So I'm specifically talking about how do you think about the disconnect in America when it comes, this is my opinion, my words, with not living with and dealing with reason and evidence and data?
That is the biggest problem right now. Like, forget the fact that our nation's forefathers purposely built this nation to have tension built in. That's healthy and helps us until the tension breaks down and is toxic and gets us in a dataless, mindless, logicless world that we sometimes have been living in. And so for me, Pete, I think a lot about a question, for example, that I was asked after President Trump was elected but not yet taken office. Half the world was really concerned, and they said, "Hey, Mike, you've worked in 2 different White Houses. Do we need to worry?" And my answer was, we do not need to worry if process doesn't break down. Because if process doesn't break down, you're getting, different opinions, different inputs, different voices and characters all running the national policy process. Obviously, we saw that break down. Policy and process completely broke down. So for me, I believe whether you're far on the left or far on the right or somewhere in the middle, the most important thing is the process, because we have to argue for what we each think is right. But at the same time, have that open mind that, there might be some other way to do it. We're going to win sometimes. We're going to lose sometimes. Look at at the end of a baseball season, the teams in first place have won 6 out of 10 games, or something like that, 7 out of 10 games. Like, there's a lot of losing that goes into the World Series champion winners. And so that's what happens in our nation. And so for me personally, I really think that we need to do a better job of having the critical thinking, the logic, the data of what's really happening in front of us, so we can stop just automatically believing what somebody else says. Yeah. And say, is it true? If we could just get the one question, is it true? And get to the bottom of that, we will be a much better nation.
How do you deal with someone who doesn't, being a thoughtful, patient guy who doesn't seem like you would get angry and yell at somebody like me, I'm working on it because I think it's completely ineffective. But, and I want to try to convince somebody of the truth, the objective truth. How do you deal with somebody who is in complete denial of something like the election outcome or a scientific consensus around something like tobacco kills you or climate change or vaccines?
It's so funny because we talked a little bit earlier about working at a hedge fund at Bridgewater Associates. What did I learn? The best thing, I learned a lot there, but one of the things was to separate your data from your logic from your opinion. Because when you just come in markets and you say we should buy the euro or sell the yen or go long on the 30-year, that's an opinion. Now, what's more interesting is what's the data that you're looking at? What's the logic you're applying to that data? And then and then where does that lead you? Because if you unpack that, and I learned this is me learning from excellent, smart people at Bridgewater. I didn't make this up on my own. So footnote is all credit to somebody else. But then you can have the argument around data or logic, or say, hey, I think when you apply your logic to your data, it actually doesn't lead you to A, it leads you to B. And so what I think the answer to your question lies in a little bit of that arc there, Pete, which is just starting by asking somebody, what data are you looking at? Because people you can break that down so freaking quickly when you're the kind of person you're dealing with, but asking them, what is the foundation of what you're building that on? And it'll always start in the world of opinion. It never starts in the world of data. And if we can drive people back to the data, we'll be a lot better off. And that's how I try to handle it.
Well, I think, and I'd imagine you agree, but I'd really be interested in knowing what your thoughts are, that you must get so frustrated and annoyed with a lot of media in general. Certainly probably a lot of like the cable news type video stuff, or even YouTube, maybe newspapers. I don't know. But so much of media is driven by dividing people. So is politics. I look at it as elections. To win elections, you have to divide people to win elections. And you also have to divide people in media to win ratings, to be a monster, and cable news especially. Those conversations that happen most of the time on the most provocative of opinionated news shows, they're silly. They're not real. They're done for ratings. They're done to divide people and to sell usually health-related pharmaceutical products to old people. I mean, that's really what they are being done. In your world, in the military, and at the White House, at a hedge fund, at your company, you would never make a decision based on an argument like that. You make it based on nuance and data and expertise. How do you look at media, and what's broken about it is my question.
Well, it's another great topic. And so is it supply or is it demand is the underlying question, right? And so what are 325 million Americans calling for? And so is the media the chicken or the egg? And so, yes, it's very easy right now to agree. And I do agree with what you're saying, which is, look, the world has pulled far right and far left, and the middle has been hollowed out. However, I also believe there are a lot more people in that 45 to 55 kind of zone of like right and left than it would be than imaginable. And so it's just that right now that group of people isn't necessarily creating the demand for the centrist type of media that could very objectively do what we both have been describing, which is pick an issue, and then just have a reasonable debate. And by the way, let's just say let's say we hypothetically both disagreed on the Iraq war. I don't think less of you as a person. Let's take kneeling, the kneeling issue we dealt with as a country a year ago with, do you kneel at the beginning of a game? What do you do, not do? Look, I fought overseas so that people could have their own choice. Would I personally ever kneel? No, I wouldn't personally kneel, but I respect the fact that you have your choice and you can do whatever you want with your choice.
Yeah, but the arguments, the things that pisses me off are when they're not made in good faith. That's like if I'm kneeling and I'm telling you this is why I'm kneeling, and then you're telling me that's not why I'm kneeling. I'm like, no, I'm not. If I'm eating this,
who am I to judge you? I cannot tell you what's in your head, so I have to.
No, I'll tell you. That's why it's in good faith. I'm telling you what's in my head, and then you're going and saying I'm doing it for a different reason. Like there's so much bad faith argument out there. I feel like, and it's
totally agree.
But you live in a world of data and nuance, and the title of the book is Never Enough, and it's interesting because I immediately was like, I don't like that because I like enough. I think one of the problems, I don't think this is what you're saying, but I want you to, talk about it. I think one of the problems is that in America, especially, and we can talk about why this is culture or capitalism or, I don't know, history. I'll never be happy until I have this. I experience this. And I feel like one of my best attributes in life is recognizing when I became a parent that I needed to have enough work and enough time to be with my kids. And I couldn't just, and I think a lot of men deal with this. What about that definition of enough and kind of compartmentalizing your time so that you aren't working too much, for excellence, because you can only do just so much. I mean, I would go crazy. I'm doing a podcast every day, producing the entire thing myself. But, everybody's like, why don't you do this or that? I'm like, I don't have enough time. I have to be outside. I have to be with my kids. I have other responsibilities. So when is it enough?
First of all, the never enough is intentionally provocative. It's not about fame and fortune and having material things or status. It's intentionally to grab people, to force them to think actually about the more fundamental, what is enough? It's around meaning and impact. And so anybody which I hope everybody who sees the title also reads the whole book. But if you work your way through the book, you'll really figure out that it is about always building the foundation so that we can do more and give more and help more. Because look, like through life, you've been incredibly successful, Pete. The reason that you've had such a positive impact on the planet is because you have a foundation that you've been building upon year after year after year. And so the point is, if you didn't lean into a bunch of these choices and have the work ethic that you've had over your career, you might not be doing a podcast every day or be on TV like you are, influencing, a massive amount of people. And so, that's really the point of the book is how do you think about what's important to you? How do you have you recognize everybody's got their own, gifts and interests and skills and abilities. And I very explicitly state the point that you said, which is, look, you always have to be happy with yourself, and it's not a weight that's always hanging over you. It really is about meaning and impact.
I really want to talk to you at some point about parenting and how you apply to everything you write here to raising your daughter who's now 20 years old. I think about parenting all the time. What decisions? Probably too much because I need to let certain things happen. And maybe I'm certainly not a helicopter parent, but in terms of the conversations I have with my daughters and the time I spend with them and how I spend it and what opportunities to open for them and so on. But you write about community. I think that's really important that you write about that. We have we've built an amazing virtual community here, which is very cool. But you write community comes first in your book. And I feel like that's not very American anymore. I feel like it used to be, but we're so segregated now by more than anything, by the traditional things that segregate us, religion and gender, sexual orientation, obviously race, but really an ideology. And we don't want to help somebody else because we don't agree with them on some other thing. Like, I feel like we have a real problem with that. How do you think about community? How do we fix that? Do you agree there's a problem there?
I agree that there's a problem, and we've seen institutions break down, and things that used to be the fabric of our nation, whether it's the Boy or the Girl Scouts or a religious institution, or you just look around. Like what we really have to focus on is these communities, whether live or virtual, so that we can help each other grow and help each other learn and be supported. Like a lot of times I've been at networking events like we all have, and people think of these networking events as, let me go get the business card from the person who's more senior, who's really well placed, and it's very transactional. And I'm like, that is not a network. That's not a networking. To me is a group of people in whom you invest. And then when you need something, that group that you've poured energy into for the last months or years are there for you. When you need something, they're going to give you something back. And you have to, be willing to ask for it and say, hey, I could use some help now. But at the same time, that's the communities that really mean something. And we're the average of the people we hang out with. And so as I try to create situations as a parent where my daughter gets to hang around with people who are different backgrounds and learn different things, I write to, spoiler alert, but you'll see that, my daughter in sophomore year in high school was, donating and volunteering time in third world countries in both orphanages and clinics. And look, that takes a lot of gumption as a parent to say, sure, get on that plane and wave goodbye at the airport and see an international travel pre-COVID, of course. But, that's what growth comes from. It comes from giving to others. And we've talked a lot of, I'm all over the map right now, but one more thought, Pete. Resilience, as we've gone through this very challenging year and a half almost now with with COVID, the world is challenged, and I think the best thing to do is recognize that when we're having hard days, go help somebody who's having a harder day. That's the way out of it.
You do write about it. It's at the end of the book. I just found it about your daughter, and she called you after she finished her shift in the hospital and said that she saw the saddest thing. Can you tell us what happens there? I mean, everybody needs to buy this book and all the proceeds go to Gold Star families, but I guess I hadn't got to the end of the book. I didn't realize you did talk about your daughter.
Sure. Spoiler alert, of course, but there's plenty of other good stuff. I don't feel like we're undercutting the whole premise
Certainly
of the entire book here. It was a very special day. My daughter was in the Dominican Republic and called me, said, "Hey, Dad, you're not going to believe what just happened." Long story short, she was in a childbirth where the child was a C-section and stillborn. The doctor threw the baby in the trash can, and my daughter went and found the very limited supplies, but found a box of gloves, took all the gloves out, put them in the cabinet, and then created like a small little makeshift kind of coffin. She took the baby out of the trash can, put the baby into the box, and tried to prop it up as best she could and bring it to the mom and say, "I'm very sorry," and so the mom could at least have some closure and make the least bad situation happen. And so I was just like blown away. Like, where does my 15-year-old daughter get the ability to go do that? I wasn't surprised either, just for the record. But then 4 hours later, she called me again, and I thought she must be having some, lingering thoughts about what happened earlier that day. And she again was like, "Dad, you're never going to believe what happened. You're never going to believe what happened." And she's like, "I was just out on this boat snorkeling." And my daughter's very strong in the water. She, water polo, all the blah, blah, blah. And, the daughter of a Navy SEAL, as you'd expect. Yeah. But there was a classmate of hers had gone under. She saw her 100 or so yards away go under and not pop back up. My daughter just dove off the top of the boat, swam over to her, went down, found her lifeless, 10, 12 feet deep, grabbed her, brought her up, and did rescue breathing while she cross chest carried her back over the boat and saved the girl's life. So I was just like, on the same day, like those two things happened. And look, Pete, the point of it isn't about, about the actions of my daughter while they were super awesome. The thing is like how, like the parenting point, the values that we give our children are the values that they will live through their life. How do you give somebody the ability to lean into a hard situation and go do the right thing and the ability to make the right thing happen? To me, that's what parenting is about.
Yeah. I want to know how you do that.
If I had the answer, I'd tell you. I don't know how I've done it.
Well, I would imagine a lot of it is, I think that when it comes to parenting, which I love to talk about, especially with other men don't talk about it enough. But I realize, even though I still do this, that I can say things all day long, but role modeling, like the way I handle myself, I'm sure that's a lot of probably what your daughter, given your background in life, she saw you behaving in a certain way, doing things, making choices small and big, and probably that's, I would imagine that's a lot of where our kids learn things from, how we behave, not what we say, what we do, not what we say, something like that.
Agree. And I think it's really the important part there is confidence and humility coexisting, because we need to give our children so much confidence and understanding that the world looks at kind of in a binary lens of success and failure. But what's important to me is saying it's only failure. You have to go one more node down the logic tree and say, did you learn or not learn? Because if you failed and you learned, you just succeeded. And celebrating the failures where there's learning is really so important. And then what that does is it gives you confidence. It gives you the ability to lean in and try hard things. And that's a lot of reasons people don't try hard things is because they're afraid of looking dumb and afraid of failing. So, having that confidence to go do that, but at the same time, the humility that you can't be the president of your own fan club, and there might be a better way to do something. I think that's the thing that I've tried to engender with my daughter.
I'll let you go. I really love reading this book and even more talking to you. Before I do, just a quick lightning round. You hear all these stories about Navy SEALs. You know, they've got podcasts, they're writing books and so on about how they're living their lives. A lot of these guys are like fitness and talking about health and fitness and all that. I mean, how often, by the way, do you see a guy that you serve with who's a Navy SEAL who went through the most physical, challenging training that exists in the world, let themselves go? Does that ever happen? Do guys ever just blow up and wind down? No, rarely.
Not really. I think it becomes core to who you are.
So that's my question. How do you eat? What are your rules? You're what, 50? Is that how old are you?
I just turned 50 a couple days ago.
Happy birthday. So what is you have a good diet?
Yeah, I mean, pretty good. Could always be better. Cookies and cream and I get along really too well, Pete.
Your weakness is ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
But you generally speaking, like, I mean, you don't eat too much. You generally eat good food. I mean, do you have any rules in terms of your diet? Has that evolved over your lifetime?
Well, look, the engine doesn't burn quite as hot when you get older. And so the ability to just shovel the junk food in has so I've tried to, be careful about, just not shoving the junk down the throat. But look, I think that what's really important is the combination of both. But you also have to enjoy what you're eating and doing as well. My philosophy has usually been just keep working out. It's a very simple math formula. It's calories burned and calories taken in. So if you can jack the calories burned up a little bit higher, then you get to have more cookies and cream.
Yeah, sure. What you get? So you get a strict fitness regime. Is it consistent? Is it routine?
It's routine insofar as that I do something every day, and I try to break it up and be diverse. Like most SEALs, are not world class in any one thing. Like just take lifting and running. It's really about balance. It's about being able to do a little bit of everything.
Yep.
And so ending up kind of in the top third of everything, but not the top 1% of anything.
And finally, sleep. Nobody talks about it. A lot of, it's a very kind of tough guy thing to say. Like, I'll sleep when I die. I remember the CEO of the company I worked for said that. And people talk about you're lazy. So I take a nap almost every day, and I have 2 days worth of energy in one day. How do you think about sleep? How do you talk about sleep? Because this idea that sleeping is for pussies is the most infuriating thing. Also, calling people pussies, like, that's a weakness, also bothers me. But still, what's your relationship with sleep, and how important is it?
It couldn't be emphasize too much. I think that the ability to make decisions and be quick and have your own computer in your head working as well as you can, massive difference between 6 and 7 and 8 hours.
Yeah.
And so look, all of us can do anything for a day or two, but very, very quickly it's proven our mental acuity reduces dramatically as sleep declines. I would sleep more if I could. I try to sleep as much as I can. And sometimes I just wake up a little bit too early and can't get back to sleep because my mind has a million things on it. But the Headspace apps and the Calm apps and those kinds of things, I think are really nice breakthroughs that we've seen in the last couple of years. And I think sleep is the ingredient number one before even working out and eating.
I think every corporate office should have a nap room. Are you with me?
I'm in.
Mike, thank you so much for joining me. Fascinating book and conversation. Never enough. I hope everybody goes out and gets it. I really appreciate your time today.
No, Pete, thanks for your time. And thanks again for all the positive impact you've had on the world and helping not just, yourself, but helping others to, be inspired and go have impact themselves.
Very kind, sir. Thank you. All right, there he goes, Mike Hayes. What did you think of that interview? Never Enough is the new book. Proceeds go to Gold Star families, and I thought he was a very interesting guy. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him. Thanks to my friend Elise Jordan for hooking us up. And Elise, you got to come on the show if you're listening. And that is it, folks. That's all for episode 328. Is that where we're at? Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I'm here every day with your news, with your expert guest interviews, and I really appreciate your support. Go give me a review on Apple Podcasts. Give me the 5-star rating. And, of course, I would love to have you sign up to support the podcast with at least a $5 subscription, because while it is free, it is not cheap. I put a lot into it. each and every day, here daily, and this is my job. Can't do it without your support. Please support independent media, independent journalism. Thank you very much. I love you. You're not alone. Check out the Discord platform if you are a member. If you aren't, sign up for that. I'll see you Thursday at 8. That's it. Take it away, John Carroll.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you gotta stand up, stand up. I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up, that's right. You got to rise up, you got to stand up, you got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't in sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Hello, show enders. I'm back to tagging it at the end of the music. I couldn't make it work any other way. Anywho, I like to end the show here with something funny or inspiring. Let's go with the former this time, from Saturday Night Live, a sketch from Saturday night where you had these a sketch of public radio anchors, 2 white, 2 black, arguing about the potential outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial.
Sounds like we all agree there's no way Derek Chauvin walks away from this.
Okay, wait a second. You guys aren't buying into Chauvin's defense, are you?
Of course not.
I mean, the defense trying to make a case that George Floyd's drug use was somehow responsible is just deplorable.
It was a clear act of desperation to create doubt where there is none.
Exactly, and there's no way the jury's gonna fall for that.
I'm not saying
Oh, wait, so what are you guys trying to say?
Look, y'all seem like good people.
Let's just say we've seen this movie before.
Boom!
You know what? That's fair. I think skepticism of the legal process is valid.
That's all we're saying.
Yeah, historically, police have gotten away in other cases like this.
Historically?
She means every single time.
Oh, got it.
But after all the protests that happened last summer, there's no way this doesn't go the way we hope.
She means
I don't know what she's talking about.
All right, there you go. Have a great day, everybody, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.